and how things began. And then one question regarding genealogy that affects everybody is, where did life begin in the first place? There's been many theories proposed for this throughout history, particularly in the past couple hundred years. Darwinian evolution has become the predominant paradigm for the world of how we began. And we're going to talk about today how that is actually really in contrast to what the Bible says. You can't really harmonize the two. They're fundamentally different at their core. And the only way to figure out, the only book or textbook that suggests it knows what happened at the beginning, the only one that makes that claim, is the Bible. The Old Testament, the book that literally means the origin, which is the book of Genesis in the Bible. And so we got to take a look at Genesis chapters 1 and 2 today to figure it out. In case you're wondering, Genesis 1 and 2 are very similar. Scholars in the past couple hundred years have suggested that maybe the first 5 books of the Bible are kind of a patchwork piece put together of 4 different original sources. And they all just kind of make one big amalgamation of a final source of the early Jewish Bible. Doesn't seem to be the case at all. In fact, Jesus himself references Moses being the author of the original 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. So we have no reason to believe otherwise. But you really have to look at Genesis 1 and 2 to figure out how we began. Genesis 1 talks about the first 6 days of creation. At the beginning of Genesis 2, you get the 7th day of creation, where God establishes a day of rest. And notice what he's doing here. God doesn't need to rest because he's not limited like humans. He doesn't get exhausted like humans. He's not affected by sin like humans. But he knows that humans are limited and eventually will get tired and need rest. And so he makes intentional work the first 6 days, and he establishes also intentional rest for human beings. Sometimes humans tend towards too much rest, we get lazy, or we tend towards too much work, and we just get burnt out and it's unhealthy for us. But God establishes intentionalized work and rest. And in those first 6 days of creation, he creates first of all, on the first day, the light and the raw material of the world. The light and the darkness on the first day, but while it's a perfect world at that time, it's deficient in a sense. It's formless and empty. It's initially at least dark. There's water that covers over everything. It's incomplete or insufficient in that sense. Perfect, but not yet complete. Going on in day 2, God creates an expanse between the waters. It says that what we would call sky, waters above from waters below are now separated. Day 3, God causes dry land to emerge from the water, and out of that dry land emerges this vegetation. So what you get is God creating a world that kind of keeps bringing forth life from itself. On the first day, he establishes like raw material and the light and darkness. Second day, the sky separates the waters. Third day, the dry land and the vegetation sprouts up from the dry land. Fourth day, he establishes the heavenly bodies in the sky, the sun, moon, and stars. And we see already there kind of the brilliance of God's creation, as he says. He calls the sun and the moon the greater light and the lesser light. Think about that. People in ancient civilization who didn't exactly know how the heavenly bodies worked and to what degree they gave off light or reflected light or anything like that. Lesser light to govern the night and greater light to govern the day would have communicated to them the same thing it communicates to us today, where we clearly would say, man, that's the moon and the sun that God is talking about there, as well as all the other stars in the sky. And you want to say, well, how is there light and darkness prior to the heavenly bodies? Well, remember, this is God who's doing this. Why wouldn't he be able to, on the first day, establish light particles, and on the fourth day, harness all of those in progressive order, putting them into specific bodies in the sky that give off the light energy? Certainly God is capable of doing that. Day 5, we get the fish and the birds. Day 6, God creates the land animals of every type, both the kind of domesticated animals, the animals that run along the ground and scurry along the ground, as well as the wild animals that you think of like as jungle animals, the untamed animals. And then on the sixth day, God also creates human beings, the crown of his creation, the only creatures that were created in God's image, which sets them aside as unique and special. And then God also kind of hands the creation over to Adam and Eve, the crown of his creation. He says, "This is my gift to you. I want to join into relationship with you, but you have dominion and power and rule and authority over everything on the earth. I want you to fill it and subdue it and enjoy it." And this is a tremendously generous God who hands over a beautiful creation, something that after each day he says, "It is good." So clearly it is absolutely perfect if God says it's good. And he hands it over to Adam and Eve to enjoy. What you get in Genesis chapter 2 then, at the beginning of Genesis 2, as I mentioned, you get the seventh day where God establishes a day of rest, which will become the Sabbath day for the Jews in the Old Testament. And starting then, a couple verses into Genesis chapter 2, what you see is a going back and a reaccounting of the most important part of the 6 days, initial 6 days of creation, which is God creating Adam and Eve. It's kind of like the illustration has been used of a newspaper, where within the first paragraph you kind of get the who, what, when, where, why. And that's just good journalism, and you need to find out the gist of the story just by that first paragraph, and then the rest of the story goes into greater depth on the who, what, when, where, why. That's what Genesis 2 is doing. It's showing the wedding that God gives between Adam and Eve, how he fashions them, how he breathes life into them, and how he unites them together, one man and one woman in marriage. Genesis 1 and 2 is the correct explanation to how the world began. It is the only source that claims any kind of authority back then. God speaks these words to Moses around 1500 BC, recorded for all generations then to know, and it's only been within the past couple hundred years that a theory like evolution has really gained any kind of roots. And there's all sorts of reasons why it's the popular paradigm of the world today, but the primary reason is sin. People would rather not believe in God, because if God truly exists, that means there is a true standard of morality, and people would rather be able to answer only to themselves and not to anybody else. Genesis 1 is the actual, factual, literal account of where we all began and where this world and universe came from.